Hello, and welcome to the next Thomas Westcott webinar. My name is Patrick Tigwell. I'm a general practice partner at the firm at their Exeter and Tiverton offices. And again, it's my pleasure to be your host for this afternoon. It's been a rather an odd week this week, with further measures aimed at easing the lockdown, including the bubble concept. So fans of West Ham will be liking that one, I suspect. We've had some children returning to schools. In my younger son's case, Christian, who's in year 10, somewhat reluctantly, I would add. And the big news, non-essential retail is able to reopen. And we've even seen people get into Primark. Who would have thought? Strange times indeed. And it's the retail developments that will be the focus of this afternoon's webinar. But firstly, as always, we have a general update on the COVID business support measures from the government. And to do that is one of TW's finest, my North Devon partner colleague, Head of Tax, generally good egg, Mark Tibbert. And after Mark's update, we'll have hopefully two guests to discuss the opening of retail. Steve Hughes, who's currently present and correct, is the Chief Executive of Plymouth City Centre Company. Now, this is a not-for-profit organisation that represents the interests of over 560 city centre businesses in Plymouth. And I think it's fair to say they've had a lead role in the reopening of Plymouth City Centre. Steve himself's a very widely travelled chap. I was looking on LinkedIn, at least we're in the UK. His experience covers East Anglia, Bolton, York, Bournemouth, and now Plymouth. So we've got a wide geographical kind of based experience there. Continuing our sort of Plymouthian theme, and hopefully joining us, he's having a few technical issues, is Mike Grainger. Mike is the Managing Director of GT Motorcycles, which is the Southwest's leading Honda, Yamaha, Ducati, Kawasaki and Suzuki franchise dealer. And he'll be giving his views on the reopening of his business. Mike describes himself as the fastest granddad on two wheels. Apparently he's been doing these sort of trials up at some airfield in Yorkshire, I believe. He also, I think, has a record, I think he was saying, for the longest wheelie. So be the fastest granddad on one wheel, I suspect. So hopefully he can join us, because I'm really looking forward to his take on things. Additionally, in a slight change, we do have Alex Eastland in charge of the technology today. Now, Alex is part of our marketing team and is deputising for Jamie Giles, who's on holiday this week. He's probably in a Primark queue as we speak, sulking about the result of the Arsenal game last night. Alex is recording this webinar and we'll be sending it to you all afterwards. What's the plan? We've allowed 3/4 of an hour. So after we've heard from the guys, and hopefully Mike will join us, we'll still have ample time for questions. We have had questions, obviously, as part of the registration process. But if you haven't yet submitted a question, you still can using the Q&A button, sort of down there somewhere. Please post anon if you would rather your name wasn't read out. And as always, do remember that we can't necessarily answer very detailed questions on the call, but rest assured we would get to them afterwards. If the webinar finishes and you still like to ask a question or come back on a point that hasn't been addressed, you still can at events@thomaswestcott, all one word, .co.uk. So, right, that's the sort of housekeeping and intros done. I'd like to pass over to my esteemed colleague, Mark, for his take on what's happened over the last week. So, Mark, it's over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Patrick. And as sort of Patrick alluded to there, it's been a relatively quiet week in terms of announcements, in terms of relief for businesses. One that was put out yesterday was there's going to be a slight change to the self-employed income support around allowing those on maternity leave or parental leave that had their profits impacted in 18-19 possibly ignore 1819. The biggest change, I think, in the last week was the sort of detailed announcements around the job retention scheme. And whilst I don't propose to go into too much detail on that, and I know we've sort of briefly mentioned it over the last couple of weeks as the extension was announced, I thought I'd just sort of pick up on what are the key points, what are the main points from the detail, and we'll probably look to go into it in a little bit more detail probably over the next week or two. So as a headline and how it might impact on the retail businesses as well, the scheme is changing in effect from the 1st of July, when you'll, instead of just having full-time furlough, i.e. the individual has to be furloughed for 3 weeks, can't do any work for a year as the employer. From the 1st of July, you'll be able to offer people part-time furlough, so they'll be able to do something for you on whatever basis you want to agree with them. And you'll still be able to recover as you currently do, i.e. 80% of their normal pay and all the employer's national insurance and pension associated with that. From 1st of August, the amount you can recover from the government is changing slightly in that you won't be able to recover the employer's national insurance or pension. That's probably going to equate to roughly 5% of most employers' wage bills. From the 1st of September, the amount you're allowed to recover as the employer is dropping from 80% to 70%. You still have to pay the employee 80% of their normal pay. So effectively, you're having to top it up by 10%. And from October, it's dropping to 60%, so you're having to top up 20%. With those drops in September and October, effectively the cap per month is also decreasing. Current cap is 2,500, so in September it reduces to 2,187, and in October it reduces to 1,875. So the biggest change coming in July, from a practical point of view, is allowing part-time furlough. As the employer, what the key things you really need to think about if you're going to look to bring people back on a part-time basis is, as with when you put them on furlough, you need to ensure you get anything agreed in writing with the employee. The key point of this and why it's so important is the revenue will, if they start to do checks over the next 4 or 5 years on claims that have been made, will expect to see that documentation in there. The other additional point, which is going to be needed when you actually make the claims based on the guidance that's been issued, is you'll need to know the number of hours the individual has worked for you if they're coming back part-time, and you'll need to calculate the usual hours they have worked. There's very specific ways in which the usual hours need to be calculated, depending upon whether it's a salaried employee or on a variable hours contract. Generally, it's looking at, well, what was their normal, would have been their normal hourly hours worked in the pay period just before the 19th of March. If they're a salaried, or for variable hours, it's looking at an average of their normal working hours over the 1920 tax year and comparing it with the same period in the previous calendar year. So we'll look to go into that calculation possibly in a little more detail next week. Alongside that is then looking at, well, what are the furloughed hours, which is probably the simplest part of the calculation, simply the usual hours less the hours worked. The reason that's important is it also impacts upon the amount you're able to recover. So, for example, if you have someone that comes back, works part-time for you, 50% of their normal working week throughout July, the annual cap, that monthly cap of 2,500 that's in place, will become 1,250 when you're looking at how much you can reclaim on their normal furlough pay. In addition, from an admin point of view, the claims going forward will always have to be relate to periods within a calendar month. At the moment, if you wanted to submit a JRS claim, it can be for any period at all, so long as it doesn't overlap with a previous period and it's not more than 14 days in the future. So it can cross over, so you could have made a claim in June for all of March, April and May if you wanted to. Going forward, it can only be a claim in respect of one calendar month at most. The minimum claim period has to be 7 days at least. The one exception to that is, because claims can only be made for a calendar month, is if the claim period incorporates the first or the last day of the month, it can be slightly shorter than 7 days. In terms of deadlines, the points to really pick up are, for any claims for JRS prior to the 30th of June, they will have to have been made by the 31st of July. Until now, there's been no deadline on when you had to make the claim. That's therefore important if you've not been making regular claims as you're going along, just to make sure that everything's brought up to date no later than the 31st of July. Otherwise, you find yourself locked out of the scheme. With the part-time furlough coming in, there's essentially no minimum furlough period. So at the moment, if you wanted to put someone on furlough, it had to have been for a minimum of 3 weeks, which is why the 10th of June was a key date for anyone that was going on furlough for the first time. If you had someone on furlough, for example, in April, and had brought them back into work for May, and they were still working, but you were thinking about furloughing them again now, if you furlough them before the 30th of June, they will have to remain on furlough for at least a 3-week period going into July to remain eligible for the 30th of June period. If you wanted to bring them back and you bring them back on the 1st of July, you can bring them back or put them on furlough for whatever period you like. You can have them going, working one day, furlough the next, and so on. There is no restriction on that at all. And the other important point to note is, from the 1st of July, claims will be limited to the highest number of individual employees on any one claim prior to the 30th of June. So, for example, if you'd submitted in April 15 employees, May 20 employees, and June 30 employees, any claim submission from the 1st of July could only be for a maximum of 30 employees, even if you had 40 employees on furlough. Finally, just a few other points to note. If you have made errors on your JRS submissions, there's 2 possible ways of remedying those. If it's an overclaim, HMRC have amended the claim process now, so you can simply adjust it on your next JRS submission to reduce the amount you're claiming there. If the error has been found out and you're not making any further JRS submissions, HMRC has said you just have to wait. They're working on a process to enable you to contact them to enable and repay whatever you need to. What they have said, though, is if you've underclaimed on any claim, don't just simply add it on to the next claim. You should contact HMRC to make that additional claim. And finally, where you've got people on maternity or paternity leave and they're coming back, they are subject to slightly more relaxed rules around whether they can be furloughed or not from the 1st of July. Effectively, so long as you as the employer had previously made a JRS claim in respect of any other employee prior to the 30th of June, and the individual coming back from maternity leave started that leave before the 10th of June and has come back after the 10th of June, and subject to the normal rule that they were on the payroll with an RTI submission before the 19th of March 2020, then they can then be included on a future furlough claim on a part-time or full-time basis, and that you can increase the number of individual employees you can make on only one claim by the number of people coming back from maternity or paternity leave. Appreciate that's a very quick fly through there of some of the key admin points and points to be aware of, and we'll look to go into more detail on it probably next week.
Okay, thanks, Mark, and welcome, Mike. It's good to sort of actually see you and hear you as well. So
sorry about that. I do apologise.
the technology is great when it works, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Welcome, and you missed a stunning intro from me, bigging you up. So yeah. A couple of questions for you, Mark, though, before we move to Steve. One from Carol on pre-submitted. Is it possible to bring an employee out of furlough on the 1st of July for one day and return them to furlough on the next day until the 31st of July? Obviously, she's assuming that the rules about previously being furloughed are being met, and then agreeing kind of part-time hours during August. I mean, that's
yeah, that's perfectly allowable. Effectively, so long as they've met the having been furloughed at some point before the 30th of June, for that 3-week period, you can agree whatever you like in terms of a part-time.
Yeah, and another question we've had just on the call now, sort of taking it a step further, that if you're using the flexible furlough, and obviously you're being flexible, so hours that you're asking a particular employee to work vary, do you know if they would have to, it's possibly more of an employment law, but would they have to get that employee's agreement every time it changes, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's going more towards employment law and how much you want to protect yourself. But so long as you have something in writing that documents what you've done, so email communications, I think, as the query is put there, would suffice, because the email communication, in theory, it was sufficient for the furlough scheme initially.
Yeah. And then just moving away from that, just answering the other question we've received on the call about the bounce back loans. And obviously the lender's asking for 2019 turnover. But if the accounts have already been done, in this case, fiscal year, say 31st of March 20, do you know if they would use that more up-to-date figure, or would they use they would be stuck at using the 2019, March 2019
my experience is
ahead of tax. I mean, it's I wouldn't know.
My experience on the bounce back loans is that they've not tended to check back to the accounts you're using. It's just a declaration on the number.
Yeah.
So if you've got the 1920 figures, I can see no harm in using those.
I mean, I would say you use the most recent figures, because that's what they would be, the lender would be interested in.
Yeah.
Unless they say otherwise. Okay. Right, we'll move on now then. If we get any more questions on the JRS or whatever, we can deal with them at the end. But we'll move on to you now, Steve. Obviously, it's been a momentous week for Plymouth City Centre. So tell us the story. What happened?
Well, it all went a bit crazy on Monday. So for those of you who don't know, I'll just give a little bit of background to what we are. As Patrick said in the beginning, we're a not-for-profit organisation called a business improvement district, and my main area of responsibility is the core city centre. So of course we've been in lockdown for almost 3 months now, with only the essential shops opening. So the city centre during the day has been very much a ghost town. And we've been working really hard behind the scenes with partners such as Plymouth City Council to get ready for the phase 1 of the reopening, which was the non-essential shops on Monday. And none of us really knew quite what to expect. But clearly there was some pent-up demand, because it was absolutely crazy in the morning, particularly at 3 of the main stores, with huge queues to get into Primark, Sports Direct and TK Maxx. So clearly people had a bit of an eye on a bargain. And it was taking about 2 hours just to get in the store at Sports Direct on Monday morning. But even some of our other traders did, they were obviously really pleased to be back and at last making some money. And one of the other traders said to me it was like Christmas Eve on Monday. But it calmed down very quickly. So even by 3 o'clock on Monday afternoon, the city centre had quietened down a bit. And certainly the rest of this week has been much, much calmer. The priority for us and all of our businesses is safety, and that remains the case. So most of the preparation that we did prior to all of this was in terms of getting those businesses ready to reopen safely. So doing their risk assessments, putting their COVID safety aware stickers in the windows and those kinds of things. And the other thing that we did as a business improvement district very early on in the this crisis, and it was a crisis, was we launched a website called Shop for Plymouth, which is the figure 4, so Shop figure 4 Plymouth. And what I'm encouraging everybody to do at the moment is have a look at that, because that's providing genuine support for local businesses and trying to keep the economy ticking over in Plymouth. So that provided an opportunity for lots of our businesses to continue trading, either online or with click and collect type services. And that was certainly taken up with the food and drink industry. So that's proving quite successful. And we're now looking to develop that further and continue with that brand, that Shop for Plymouth brand, which isn't just the city centre, it's the whole of Plymouth and a little bit wider, to really help kickstart the economy for the retail sector. And I think what a lot of people forget about retail as well is just how important that is to the wider economy of Plymouth. So we've got something like 16,000 people working in the city centre, mostly in retail, and obviously lots of people in Plymouth have got their mum works in retail, or their dad works in retail, their son, their sister, their brother. And what we're saying is now's the time to buy local, support your local high street, and get out and support some of these businesses rather than buying everything online. So we can't gloss over the fact that even before COVID-19, times were really, really hard for the retail sector, and COVID-19 has made that worse. We expect some shops probably never to reopen again, but others will bounce back and recover. And I think, to end on a positive note, to try to find something positive to talk about and some opportunities out of this, I think we're really lucky in Plymouth that we already had a plan to address the future high street, not just us, but with partners, again, such as Plymouth City Council. So we have something like £400 million worth of investment on the way for the city centre, a mixture of private and public sector investment. And that's all still there, that's in the pipeline, and that includes things like the Barcode, which is the new cinema and leisure complex next to Drake Circus, which have to feel a bit sorry for them. They just got going and they had to close again. And then, of course, we've also got the opening of the Box, the new cultural attraction, museum and art gallery, a £50 million city centre investment, which was due to open in May and will now open later this year. And hopefully, if we can get over this virus, it's developments like that that will stand Plymouth in really good stead in terms of attracting more visitors, attracting more customers, and creating a more vibrant city centre, which will not only benefit the retailers but benefit the whole city. So I think that's it really. We're now getting ready for phase 2, which is the hospitality sector, which, as we all know, should be able to reopen in some form from July the 4th. We're still waiting for the latest government advice on that. And we're not quite sure how that's going to manifest itself yet because of the social distancing rules. So there's quite a strong lobbying going on for maybe the 2-metre rule to be reduced. So we'll see what happens there. But certainly, if the weather's good, we expect there to be relaxation of some of the rules about eating and drinking outside, and that might bring some of the vibrancy back to the city centre. The other big loss for us, of course, was the loss of our flagship events like Flavourfest, Plymouth Summer of Fun, some of those mass participation events that in the past would have driven footfall to the city centre. So we're having to think very differently about what we can do to support all our businesses. But as I say, on a positive note, there's a lot going on in the background. There's a lot of investment on the way, and we will bounce back.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. You mentioned, Sports Direct, TK Maxx, Primark reopening. Have there been any absences from, that haven't reopened? Any stores that haven't reopened?
Yes, it's a bit of a mixed bag, and we expected this. And actually, in many ways, it helps, because we always said that we wanted a safe and gradual reopening of the city centre, because there's so much trial and error that we wanted to see how it goes. So that's why Monday morning took us by surprise a bit. We would have preferred a steadier return of shoppers. We've done everything we can to make it safe and welcoming. But for some businesses, it's not simply a question of closing one day and then 3 months later reopening. As Mark mentioned earlier, a lot of these stores have had pretty much all their staff on furlough. They have to test things. The big stores in particular have to have a deep clean. They have to retrain their staff. They have to install a whole load of PPE equipment, perspex screens, hand sanitizer. So for some businesses, it's taking them a little bit longer. So House of Fraser opened on Tuesday. Debenhams, I think, opened yesterday. I think Next are opening tomorrow, and some stores aren't opening until next week. So the city centre is fully open. Drake's Circus is fully open, but not all the stores. Plymouth Market is open, but not all the traders. And most of the high street stores are opening gradually. But of course, not anything where there's personal contact. So hairdressers are still closed, bars are still closed, cafes and restaurants to sit in are still closed. But
on that, Steve, because it strikes me that part of the appeal of the high street is not only the sort of stalls they have there, but the experience of going there and having a coffee and everything.
Very much so.
This week that the absence of that has really hindered the reopening process? Or things quieting down?
We were very lucky on Monday in that it was a really nice day. So it was a nice warm summer's day. And because we've got a nice pedestrian area and really wide streets, social distancing was quite straightforward. And people were really chatty, really friendly. Everybody was being really kind. Everybody was queuing patiently. And it was well managed and quite a pleasant experience. And actually, there's quite a lot of takeaway businesses open. So on a nice warm day, there's plenty of places to get a coffee or a drink or a sandwich.
Right.
So our message to customers is come in and have a look. Make sure you feel comfortable. Make sure you adhere to the social distancing guidelines and use hand sanitizer, wash your hands, those kinds of things. And most of the businesses have really adopted that. Nearly every business has got a member of staff on the door with hand sanitizer, welcoming customers in. And I think that what's happened during this lockdown actually is there's been a bit of a return to favour of traditional shopping. So people, because they haven't been using their cars, have been walking into the city centre, using Plymouth Market, buying fruit and veg from the fruit and veg stall or the butchers around the corner. And that's something that we're going to try to capitalise on. We're trying to say, look, maybe now is a time to, not always, we're not saying don't ever use the supermarket again, but every now and again, put a bit of money in the pockets of local independent traders, because the city centre depends on that.
Yeah.
And
have just a question here from Karen. How have many of the charity shops reopened in Plymouth? Do you know if they?
That's a good point, and I don't think they have yet. We do know that St Luke's are opening their big pop-up store, which is in the old Toys R Us store. That's the first charity shop that they're going to open, and that will be opening next Tuesday, for example. The ones on the high street, I'm really sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. A couple were open, but a few weren't. So I don't know if that's changed over the last few days. But I'm back in the city centre tomorrow, so I'll remember to have a look out for that.
Good. Yeah, thanks then, Steve. We've got a few more questions that, if we have time, we'll come back to at the end.
Sure.
I'd like to, hopefully before the technology fails, or it won't, I'd like to get Mike involved now.
Sure.
Yeah, so Mike, if you'd like to give us, obviously you reopened the business, your business has reopened. If you'd like to give us sort of your story and on what went well.
Absolutely. Thank you for being patient and waiting for me to join. I do apologise. It's a motorbike, I'm all right. All joking aside, we've been open in the service department throughout. We've kept it open mainly for staff that needed us. That's been very successful, if I'm honest. We've had 2 technicians in. We've had service reception, well, the workshop manager in, and the guy doing all the parts. So we've kept the business going. For 3 weeks at least, I was at home working from home, and was taking an awful lot of inquiries on the net, a lot for a website, through Bike Trader and all the rest of it, and very successfully sold a lot of bikes. As you know, we were allowed to deliver around the country, so we did. We did very well with that. Then it was getting too busy online, and I ended up pulling 2 sales guys in, and we actually were very successful at selling. So I was very pleased. From the 1st of June, of course, we brought most of our staff back, including opening our cafe as a takeaway, because our cafe is a very integral part of the business. And business hasn't been too bad. We had a management meeting on Tuesday, and we were down about 21% on last year to date. So I think it could have been a hell of a lot worse. The new bikes have suffered quite badly. The used bikes we've done extremely well on, because obviously a used bike is unique. So people see it on the internet, and obviously that's when they inquire. The good thing for us was a lot of people at home were bored, go on the internet, find something they're looking for, and that has been very successful for us. Funnily enough, this last week it's gone a little bit quieter. I guess it's because people have gone back to work. The majority of people have gone back to work, but it's still going along quite nicely. We did take a little bit of advantage of the low. We've moved our clothing department from one store to another and moved it. We moved our Ducatis from downstairs to upstairs and made a proper Ducati store. Where Ducati was, we put Yamaha in there because they were in a very small area. And now that area is all used bikes. So it's actually, we've taken advantage of the time, but we have obviously social distance as much as possible. Been very careful with that. At the moment, we've got all the markings on the floors. We've got really standalone sanitized units as people come in and all around the store, which are actually foot operated, so you don't even have to touch it. Generally, people have been very good. You get the occasional people that are impatient, let's say, and we have to be politely ask them to social distance or wait. Most people are very good, to be fair. But I'm pleased to say, really, it could have been a hell of a lot worse. And if we didn't do what we did, I think, well, I don't know if we'd even be here, if I'm honest. But with the help of the government, with a furlough, we had 28 staff on furlough to start with. That, you know, in its own right, over the period we had them off, probably paid 50 odd K into the business, which we didn't have to find. So whilst we did less business, and obviously with the rates as well, because our rates are very high, that's obviously helped us quite a bit. So I'm quite pleased from that point of view. I think the government have done very well. Obviously concerns me because I want all that money back sometime. So I guess my rates will be going up even more. But anyway, all joking aside, I'm generally quite pleased with it. So if anybody wants to ask me any questions, please do.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I mean, looking at your website, it struck me that you're in quite not a unique position, but your business has quite a lot of strands to it, doesn't it? You mentioned the cafe, the Legend Cafe. So you had that kind of element. You had the workshop and the parts side of things. You had the sale of used and new bikes.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of, you must have had to deal with quite a lot of different strands of income, and each one is almost treated differently. I mean, I read that, yes, the Legend Cafe is obviously open for takeaways. But I mean, how are you handling like test drives on the bikes and stuff like that?
Well, we're only doing, obviously we didn't do any until the 1st of June. The people have been quite good. We're doing it by appointment only. The days of people walking in, I just want to try that, I want to try that. Say no. What we try and do is qualify them first, find out they're going to fund it, see how soon they're going to change. And I mean, some people still lie, unfortunately, but generally it's been very successful. So test rides we still do, but obviously we sanitize the bikes when people come back. Obviously they have to ride with their own gear, and you know, the staff have been very good as well. Some are very, very nervous. Lisa, who does my service reception, she's been very nervous about it. She's been trying to keep her distance from everybody, understandably, because she's got her father living with her, who's quite an old gentleman, so she's been very concerned. Having said that, her daughter also works as a nurse in Derriford on the COVID ward, so she's been a bit concerned with that as well for our own staff, because obviously a concern of me now, if one of our members of staff get COVID-19, I don't know what we're going to do, because you know, if they've been in contact with other people, do we have to shut the store? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this is a major concern, isn't it? But I mean, it's like from your piece that you were saying just then, that you've taken every kind of sort of precaution you possibly can. I mean, actually, I was going to ask Steve this as well. Talk in the news about getting Uncle Boris to reduce the distance to 1 metre rather than 2 metres.
Yeah.
Well, if I come to you, Mike, because obviously you're later to this, what it would have a beneficial effect, presumably, but would it be significant in your mind?
Well, I think it would be very significant, particularly if they let us open the cafe properly on the 4th of July, because that will make a difference to us. People at the moment, even now, we had a guy in the other day, he came down for a service on his Ducati from Paynton, and he came in and he decided he was going to get a takeaway, and he decided he was going to sit in the cafe and eat it. And we had to very politely ask him to leave. He took his bike and he left. He wasn't very happy. So, you know, I'm not going to even buy a pair of gloves off you in the future on the stock. So I let him stew, I let him go. That afternoon I rang him, I said, look, you must understand what's going on. He said, well, I got a business and I let people sit in my canteen. I said, well, what you do and what we do is two different things. I said, as a gesture, I will come and pick your bike up, we'll service it and we'll bring it back to you. You know, I don't want to fall out with you. He was very good in the end, but I still don't think he really got it, which is a bit concerning, really.
Yeah. So
going down to 1 metre, yeah, providing people don't sneeze or cough at you, I guess it's probably going to be okay. But I don't disagree with the 2 metre distancing, if I'm honest. Certainly from the economy point of view, 1 metre would be a lot better, providing it doesn't risk people's lives.
Yeah. And Steve, if I can come to you on that point, I mean, if Plymouth City Centre businesses are operating on 1 metre, it would be a heck of a lot more beneficial for them, presumably.
I think, yeah, it's a balancing act, isn't it? And as Mike said there, really, the last thing we want is to do anything that might lead to a spike in the number of cases. Lockdown has been painful enough. We don't want another one. So I think the government is right to be cautious. But having said that, for the hospitality sector, the change in that rule could be the difference between staying in business and going bust. You know, if you think of the restaurant and the number of covers they need to survive, 2 meters apart is a lot in terms of when they come to arrange their tables. I think probably it will come down. I think the World Health Organization advice is that 1 meter is enough, particularly if people, if they are in a slightly more crowded area, they can wear a face covering. So time will tell. It's a tricky one. I think it probably will change to either 1.5 meters or 1 meter, but at the moment we're not sure when.
Okay, and Mark, if I could come to you, just ask you about your retail clients. I know we were saying before the call that I think most of them are kind of leisure and tourism based clients, but what are their thoughts with the whole reopening, or are they just waiting for the 4th as well? Or
most of the ones that are geared around sort of leisure and tourism are opening to a very limited extent. They've been like Mike had commented there, very appreciative of the furlough scheme, because without that, it would have been the end to a lot of them. And it's bringing people back very, very cautiously. They're reluctant, it seems, to bring anyone back until they absolutely have to, just because of the cost.
Yeah. I think the unknown question at the moment, really, isn't it, is how quickly any recovery is going to happen, and how cautious people are going to be about changing their behaviours. So I think the next few weeks it'll be interesting to see how things go.
Yeah. So Steve, as you were saying there, I mean, do you think the high street has a future? I mean, presumably yes, but it must be a real blow.
Yeah, we can't gloss over the fact that this has been catastrophic for the high street. Really, the high street was already suffering. People have been asking me for a long time now: is the high street dying, or has the high street died? And I've always responded by saying, no, it's definitely not dying. It's just changing, and it's like all companies and all sort of periods of time, really. Technology comes in, which changes things in a massive way, and that's what's happened to the high street. Is really shopping on mobile phones, which has transformed the high street. So, but no, I think we will bounce back. I think, as I said earlier, we're going to try to capitalise on the fact that people enjoy not just shopping, but the whole experience of coming to a city or town centre. So we're going to be working really hard on talking about buying local, shopping local, but also creating the right kind of environment for people to meet and gather and enjoy their leisure time. So I think we'll have a very different high street in 5 years' time, but I think the high street will still be a focal point for communities.
Yeah, thanks then, Steve. And Mike, just a sort of final question really to you. I mean, obviously Steve was saying about the importance of buying local and help, this sort of thing. Obviously, all your kind of products are Japanese, aren't they? So you're going to
apart from Ducati, they're Italian.
Or a Ducati, yeah. That's it. But it's on a serious note. I mean, have you, or do you think you will experience any supply chain issues with sourcing, products from Italy or Japan or wherever?
100%, yes. We're already suffering at the moment. Getting some of the stock is very difficult. Ducati is a very small factory anyway, as you know. Out of all of them, it's the smallest factory. But they're probably one of the most popular prestige bike that you can get, really. And the production was stopped for quite a while, and it has affected them quite a bit. Yamaha also suffered quite badly with production. I'm not quite sure why they were worse than others, although I think people like Kawasaki and Honda have pretty well carried on producing as much as they can. And they do hold probably a lot more stock, if I'm honest. Ducati don't really hold stock. I mean, they really build bikes to order. They're still hand-built. It's always interesting because Ducati, as soon as you get an invoice, you know they actually built the bike and they've just left the factory. The invoice comes before it actually leaves Italy, but but that's always interesting. But yeah. But all joking aside, I think there will be a problem. I think supply of used bikes will also be a bit of a problem for us. I don't know what's going to happen with the values of them, because obviously manufacturers need to sell what they have got. There's quite a lot of stock there that perhaps aren't quite the most desirable, and they still need to move them. So I think, for Suzuki, for example, for the last few years now has been the less desirable brand because they haven't really kept up with technology and the times. But the biggest problem with that is they've still got a lot of stock, and they'll be throwing money at it to move their stock. Now that, of course, in turn will affect the value of any used stock. The prices there'll be 0% finance cases, there'll be reductions. I mean, for example, Suzuki at the moment are offering £500 cash back on most of the big stuff, and they're also offering 0% finance over 4 years, which is, there's never been a better time for somebody to buy it. And my other concern, of course, is what's going to happen with unemployment and how that will affect us all. Because a motorcycle, when it used to be transport, it's not nowadays, very small number. The majority now is a leisure product. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I suppose if people have the time, they could then invest in their bikes. I mean, as we were saying earlier in the week, my brother-in-law he's got a motorcycle parts business, and he's never been so busy. But
No.
yeah, I guess that's a valid point. People need to have the kind of disposable cash for these things. But sounds like, lump on Suzuki because of the discounts, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that will affect the other manufacturers because they'll follow suit. And of course, I've got a very good friend of mine, Tony and Rob, that own Satini over at Saltash, and they've never had to go for the push bikes because they were never shut down. And as you know, everybody's riding around on push bikes now. Well, probably not the days it's raining. But.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think I'm just conscious of time. I think we'd need to sort of wrap it up there. It's obviously something we'll probably come back to in the future as the reopening kind of takes hold and further legislation or further rules are passed. If you still got some questions that you'd like to ask, please still do so. events@thomaswestcott.co.uk, and we will attend to every question. Or if you're a Thomas Westcott client, your regular partner will get back to you. We've got another webinar planned for next week, so look out for that. And finally, I'd like to thank our speakers, Mark, but especially Steve and Mike, for your contributions today, but also you, our attendees. So thank you for watching. Have a lovely rest of the week, and hopefully the weather will improve, and see you next time. And embracing my inner Ron Burgundy, stay safe, Devon and Somerset.